Something has shifted around Keith Urban, and the people closest to him feel it as much as the fans watching from a distance. For decades, he was the steady presence in country music. Dependable, polished, charming, and quietly resilient. But recently, the changes in his life, his behavior, and even his sense of identity has raised questions no one ever expected to ask about him. Keith Urban isn't spiraling, but he isn't the man the world thought they knew either. And the truth behind his transformation is far heavier than most imagined. A rise built on talent, pressure, and old wounds. Keith Urban's transformation didn't begin in 2025, nor did it begin with the headlines about his personal life. To understand where he is now, the story has to start decades earlier. Long before fame, long before the addictions that nearly destroyed him, long before Nicole Kidman stood outside his darkness with a lifeline he wasn't sure he deserved. His relationship with music began at just 4 years old when his parents handed him a ukulele, a small gift that would quietly shape the rest of his existence. By 5, he had already discovered the stage through a Johnny Cash concert, and that single night carved a vision into his mind. He wanted a life built around performance, no matter the cost. Growing up in Brisbane, he was surrounded by a father who loved country music and a home where sound filled the rooms like oxygen. The guitar entered his hands at 7, and by 14 he was already performing in bars, talent shows, anywhere that would let him stand under lights and play. He quit school at 15, abandoning normal teenage life entirely. From the beginning, Keith Urban was shaped by ambition, urgency, and a belief that music was the only path forward, even if that path would eventually lead him through darkness he didn't yet understand. His first major setbacks arrived early. At 9, he appeared on the Australian talent show Pot of Gold, only to be publicly criticized by Judge Barnard King, who dismissed country music as mediocrity. Keith held on to the one positive word the judge used. Intrinsically, a compliment, his mother explained, meant he was a natural musician, but the sting of rejection stayed with him. At 16, he tried again on New Faces, performing Air Supply's All Out of Love, but once again failed to win. Even then, the pressure of being good enough, of proving himself, had already woven itself into his identity. By 1991, he released his first album in Australia, and by 1992, he left everything behind to move to Nashville. It was a gamble that would eventually make him a global star. But in those early years, Nashville wasn't the dream Keith imagined. He spent nights in a battered van with his band, The Ranch, playing for 3 people at a time, struggling with disappointment, isolation, and the sharp edges of a music industry that wasn't interested in easing his way in. The band dissolved after their 1997 album, but the real turning point came quietly. Nashville introduced him to cocaine, love, relapse, and the moment that changed everything. By the early 2000s, Keith Urban had become one of the most celebrated new voices in country music. His albums climbed the charts, his songwriting matured, and the industry began embracing him as a rising force. But the truth was more complicated. While the world saw a charming, soft-spoken star with effortless talent, Keith himself was still wrestling quietly with the remnants of a battle he had never fully won. His first rehab stay in 1998 had interrupted the cycle. But it didn't resolve the roots of the addiction, the pressure, the loneliness, the old insecurities he carried from childhood into fame. The cracks resurfaced slowly, then suddenly everything began to shift in 2005 when he crossed paths with Nicole Kidman at the G-Day USA Gala in Los Angeles. Their connection was instant, effortless, and deeper than either expected. Nicole was one of the most recognizable actresses in the world. Keith was the Australian-born country star redefining the genre. Together they seemed unstoppable. Their relationship moved quickly, and by June 2006 they were married in a star-studded ceremony in Sydney. For Keith, meeting Nicole felt like the beginning of a new life. One where he finally believed he could outrun his past. But addiction doesn't surrender to romance. For months into their marriage, Keith relapsed. As his drinking increased and cocaine re-entered his life, the strain became impossible to hide. For someone who had always pretended to be fine, losing control in front of the person he loved most forced him to confront a truth he had spent years denying. He was not well, and he could not fix this alone. Nicole noticed the signs, the subtle shifts, the emotional distance, the familiar shades of someone slipping into dangerous territory. Instead of waiting for the crash, she intervened. Gathering a small circle of people Keith trusted, she staged an intervention with a calm, unwavering resolve. It wasn't an ultimatum. It wasn't anger. It was love delivered with urgency, a lifeline disguised as a boundary. Keith later admitted that Nicole's intervention was the moment he realized he was standing at the final crossroads he had always feared. He checked himself into the Betty Ford Center in October 2006, canceling media appearances, stepping away from the public eye, and entering a fight not against fame or pressure, but against himself. He spent months in treatment, emerging in January 2007, sober, humbled, and aware that survival required total honesty and complete commitment, fame, discipline, and the long road to stability. After leaving the Betty Ford Center in 2007, Keith Urban began the longest and most disciplined chapter of his career. A chapter that would redefine him as both an artist and a man. He emerged from treatment sober, vulnerable, and surprisingly clear-eyed about what needed to change. Unlike his earlier attempts, this time sobriety wasn't a temporary pause in chaos. It became the organizing principle of his life, shaping his decisions, his relationships, and ultimately the kind of artist he would become. His music evolved first. The albums he released after 2007 carried the emotional weight of a man rebuilding himself from the inside out. Get Closer in 2010, Fuse in 2013, Ripcord in 2016, Graffiti You in 2018. Each one marked a different phase in Keith's healing. He blended country with pop, rock, electronic influences, and even unconventional rhythms, pushing boundaries that many traditionalists never expected from him. Yet, even as he reinvented his sound, his lyrics grew more personal, more reflective, more tethered to the hard-won clarity sobriety had given him. But Keith's transformation wasn't confined to the studio. The public saw a new side of him through television. His first experience as a coach on The Voice Australia in 2011 seemed like a natural extension of his gentle, encouraging nature. What surprised people most was how well he fit into the role. Thoughtful, supportive, honest without being cruel. It was the kind of mentorship that came not just from talent, but from years of learning how to confront his own failures. That made him the perfect addition to American Idol in 2012, where he joined a panel that famously included Nicki Minaj and Mariah Carey. While the tension between the two divas made headlines, Keith remained the calm center of the storm. The one judge contestants consistently turned to for sincerity. He stayed until the show's original run ended and even returned as mentor for the 2023 revival. Television didn't make him a celebrity. It made him human. Fans saw a man who was kind, open, emotionally present, qualities that don't always survive in the entertainment industry. His mentorship style reflected something deeper. He understood what it meant to fall apart, to rebuild, to stand again. He had lived it. Yet stability is rarely permanent, and Keith's transformation was not linear. While his sobriety remained intact, the pressures of fame, family, expectations, and personal history still existed beneath the surface. The world thought Keith had finally outrun his struggles. But what they didn't see was that he had simply learned to carry them differently. He poured himself into work, albums, tours, international appearances, a Las Vegas residency. He said yes to opportunities that kept him moving, perhaps because stillness had always been dangerous for him. His tattooed arms and toned physique in 2025 showed the discipline he had built. His face, marked by age, but sharpened by experience, revealed a man who had earned both triumph and pain. Personal fractures, public questions, and the unraveling of 2025. Keith Urban had survived addiction, endured the brutal early years of his career, rebuilt his life through love, and maintained sobriety for nearly 2 decades. But even the strongest foundations can fracture quietly from pressures that come not from substances, but from time, expectation, and the weight of a life lived in full view of the world. By 2025, Keith found himself in a different kind of crisis, one not fueled by relapse, but by transformation, frustration, and emotional distance that even he struggled to explain. The first signs were subtle. A shift in his demeanor, a tightening in his interviews, decisions that shocked the people who had known him for years. In January 2025, several outlets, including Patriot News, reported that Keith had abruptly fired multiple longtime band members, some of whom had played beside him for more than 25 years. The dismissals came without warning, without public explanation, and without the warm professionalism Keith had always been known for. For fans and insiders, it was the first undeniable indication that something inside him had changed. Then came the marriage. For nearly 2 decades, Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman had been one of Hollywood's most admired couples, a partnership built on devotion, mutual protection, and the shared triumphs and traumas that shaped their adult lives. They raised 2 daughters together, supported each other's careers, and weathered addiction, fame, and constant public scrutiny. To many, their marriage looked unshakable. But in 2025, it ended. Reports described the breakup as one-sided. Nicole, according to sources who spoke to People, had wanted to save the marriage. Keith, however, wanted out. After 19 years, the partnership that had once saved him now fractured in a way no one expected, least of all their fans. Unlike past difficulties, this rupture didn't come with heartfelt statements, unified interviews, or emotional transparency. It came with silence, distance, and a sense of finality that felt unsettlingly unlike Keith. Around the same time, Keith began altering lyrics in some of his most beloved songs, including songs written for Nicole, a choice that left audiences confused, and commentators speculating. These weren't playful improvisations. They came across as pointed, sometimes darker, sometimes strangely detached, fueling perceptions that he was in the middle of a midlife reckoning. Some called it reinvention, others called it crisis. No one could agree except on one point. Keith Urban was not acting like the man the public had come to know. Even professionally, cracks showed. As much as he continued performing and maintaining his presence in the industry, the emotional texture of his public persona shifted. The warmth was still there, but there was an edge beneath it, a guardedness, a restlessness, a sense of someone searching for something he could not name. It wasn't addiction. It wasn't arrogance. It was exhaustion. The kind that comes after decades of holding yourself together for the sake of everyone else. This version of Keith wasn't reckless. He was unraveling inwardly, quietly, and perhaps inevitably. For a boy who had chased perfection since age 7, who had spent adulthood fighting demons no one else could see, 2025 marked the year when the internal conflict finally spilled into public view. The pressure of public life and the cost of being watched. Keith Urban's unraveling did not happen in isolation. Fame had always been a double-edged sword for him, both blessing and burden. But in the years leading up to 2025, the weight of constant visibility became harder to carry. The world had followed his marriage, his sobriety, his career, his fatherhood. Every success was amplified, but so were the cracks. And for someone who valued emotional privacy as fiercely as Keith did, being watched began to feel more like a prison than a privilege. The turning point came long before the separation of 2025, in 2013, when Nicole Kidman was knocked to the ground by a paparazzo speeding toward her on a bicycle. It happened in the middle of a busy New York sidewalk, a chaotic moment captured by onlookers and blasted across headlines within hours. Nicole was shaken but physically unharmed. Keith, who was not there at the time but learned what happened almost immediately, reacted not with rage, but with a rare, steady public plea for basic human respect. His words revealed what he rarely spoke about, the toll that constant surveillance had taken on him, on Nicole, and on their daughters. That incident marked a shift. From that point forward, Keith became more guarded in interviews, quicker to cut off invasive questions, more protective of the life he built behind closed doors. A now famous radio interview, the one he abruptly ended when the host asked how he felt watching Nicole's intimate scenes in her films, showed just how thin the line had become between curiosity and disrespect. Keith didn't explode. He didn't lecture. He simply drew a boundary so sharply that the room fell silent. It was a moment that defined the version of him fans saw for the next decade, controlled, respectful, but unwilling to let anyone cross into the private world he fought so hard to preserve. Yet, even as he protected his family from external pressures, the internal ones mounted. His Las Vegas residency, massive tours, televised mentor roles, and non-stop creative output kept him in a constant cycle of performing, producing, delivering. To the public, he appeared limitless, always upbeat, always polished, always present. But maintaining that image required energy that even he couldn't sustain indefinitely. By the time 2024 turned into 2025, the emotional tightness around him was unmistakable. Friends and industry insiders noted changes that were subtle but undeniable. Moments of withdrawal, flashes of impatience, decisions made abruptly rather than thoughtfully. His firing of longtime band members wasn't just a managerial adjustment. It was a symptom of deeper unrest, a search for control at a time when other parts of his life felt uncertain. He had spent decades rebuilding himself after addiction, keeping his marriage strong, raising children, and navigating a career filled with extraordinary highs and crushing lows. He had become the picture of resilience, of transformation, of triumph over hardship. But resilience has limits. Stability has limits. Even healing has limits. Keith Urban's journey has always been shaped by resilience. But 2025 marked a turning point unlike any he had faced before. His transformation is complex, emotional, and still unfolding. And fans are watching closely to see what version of Keith emerges next. What do you think is the biggest turning point in his story? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this.